All right, so we're back working on the Frontier again. Right now we're actually working on getting the Armada rear subframe put back together. This is a stock rear subframe that we powder coated silver, cleaned it up obviously, got some brand new OEM replacement control arms. They're not factory arms, but you can get all these arms from the aftermarket pretty cheap. It was cheaper to buy the arm than it was to try to recondition the factory arm, so we just went that route. And we're just getting it together to mock up under the frame of the Frontier. So we're going to get the control arms mounted up on here, get the spindles on and the wheel bearings so that we can gauge where the axle center is relative on the Armada subframe compared to where it was with the Frontier live axle. Because even though the frame's the same shape and the subframe would fit up under the frame, the body could be made differently with the axle center line in different spots. So we want to verify that before we just go welding in mounts, put the subframe in, go to put the pickup truck bed back on, and the tire doesn't fit under the bed anymore. So that's what we're working on right now. We're going to get this all put together and get it up under the truck and see what it looks like. All right, so what we got right now is the subframe completely mocked up. What we have is, I think I said earlier, OEM replacement style upper and lower control arms in the front. The rear on the Armada independent suspension is a lot like a 350Z or a G35 370, where it has a mid-link with a spring bucket and a coil spring right here to set ride height. We're eliminating that on this setup. You're looking at the subframe upside down right now, by the way, as well, so this is the bottom. It was just easier to set it on the bench to assemble this way. So this is what's going to bolt up to the frame of the Frontier. So this lower control arm, even though it's on top, has a spot on it here where the shock would have mounted in the rear. So it would have had a coil there and a shock here. What we're going to do is obviously running these SPL mid-links. These are actually for an R35 GTR application, believe it or not, but with a different Heim joint, they fit this setup. What we're going to do is put a true coilover setup here. So we're going to weld in an upper shock mount to the Frontier's frame, and then there'll be a true coilover here and no spring here. That way we can set our spring rates, ride height, things like that, adjust the dampers. And then the plan now is to get this under the Frontier's frame. Position it as best we can. We marked the Frontier's frame before we took it apart as to where the axle center line was on the frame, and we can get this over there. Once it's over there and under the truck, we'll put the wheel hubs on, and then we can figure out where axle center line is on this independent suspension and make sure we get it positioned properly under the Frontier's frame. So that's the plan. That's where we're headed right now. All right, so we got the subframe mocked up under the frame of the Frontier, and kind of what I feared came true. Even though the subframe or the frame arch on the Frontier follows the same shape as a Pathfinder or Armada, if we had put this on here like it would have been on the Armada, you can see this is nowhere near the frame. It actually would have welded on up here, and the whole subframe would have moved forward. And that would have worked fine because the wheel arch on the body of an Armada or Pathfinder is in a different spot. But we still want to use the factory bed, and I don't want to shorten the bed on this truck and section it or anything like that. So we had to move the subframe to the rear to get the center of the wheel even with the center line of where the factory axle was in this truck. So what that ended up doing is giving us this huge gap here. So now I've got to build a custom brace to tie the frame into the front subframe mount. All we did in the back here was drill the two mounts. We're short one bolt right now, but to hold the rear subframe onto the existing frame. What we're going to do is actually plate this with the bolts to give it a little bit more support here and distribute the load further. Kind of amazingly, there was a hole in the bottom of the frame, and these subframes have a locating pin sticking up off the top, and that locating pin dropped right into the hole on the frame. The hole's oval shaped, and basically with the pin centered in that hole in the oval spot on the frame, it lined up our axle center line. I mean, if you stand on the side here and look at this higher now, and where this purple mark is on the frame, you're pretty much dead on axle center line where it was with the live axle. So the setup looks pretty wild right now. These are 325 tires on 20-inch wheels. They're 12.5-inch wide wheels. And with the offset of these wheels, I mean, they stick out quite a bit on the truck. And that's the look I'm going for on this thing. It's going to have crazy wide flares. By our math, it's going to be like an 8-inch or a 10-inch flare on each side, which is going to look pretty awesome. But I mean, as you can see, it's all bolted in where it should be right now. Obviously, we've got some more fab work to do and a little bit more welding and stuff to do on the frame. That's why the frame still looks all nasty. Once we get all the fab work done, we'll clean up the back half of the frame and paint the back half of the frame. And then we're going to pull the body and start doing the front end suspension work and the front end engine transplant and all that stuff, which we'll see in future videos. But so the plan right now is we've got to purchase some more hardware for putting the suspension together. I didn't have all the required bolts, so some of it's the wrong diameter, so there's a lot of like slop in the suspension right now, but it's kind of in place. What I'm really like thankful to see is that with the factory eccentric bolts for camber adjustment, this is kind of the ride height that I'm going to be looking for. We're not showing any crazy camber on the tires. These SPL mid-link arms give us more than enough adjustment to get the toe back in check. And what we're going to do on the front here, I talked about this earlier, but the lower control arm has a mount right here that is where the factory Armada shock would have been bolted. And on the Armada, there's a bracket for the upper end of the shock, which obviously is missing on this frame. And then the Armada has a coil spring under this subframe mount that goes to the mid-link. Obviously, that's not there either because we're not running the factory coil setup. But what we're going to do is fabricate a couple brackets here to hold the top of a coilover. And the coilover spring and shock will be connected to the lower control arm there. There'll be no spring back here. It's kind of like a coilover conversion that guys do on their 350Zs and G35s and stuff like that. Right now, it's just factory rear Armada brakes. We've got upgraded rotors and pads and all that kind of stuff on it. This truck is a lot lighter than an Armada is, so that'll work well for now. We're going to get this whole, like I said, get the whole frame cleaned up, try to do the rest of our fab work for any mounting tabs for brake lines. We're going to reroute brake lines. Obviously, these brake hardline mounting points aren't in the right spot for running lines to these calipers and all, so we'll relocate a lot of that stuff. But super happy with the way this came out. You know, going to work here, and we've got the subframe mounted into the truck, which really, I mean, looks great. And you know, we're excited for the next step. So, you know, thanks so much for tuning in. Please like, subscribe. Interesting project we got going on that we're really excited about. So thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you later.